If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Late night workers, graveyard shifters, and night shift nurses, what's the creepiest or most paranormal thing you've ever experienced on the job?
I work in senior care, and some of our clients are on 24/7 care. This means that we don't go home until another caregiver comes to relieve us, and someone is always present, even through the night. That night shift goes from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Once, I was working this shift with a client who lived in a 2-story ranch house. To make things easier, we set up baby monitors to hear his room from the lower floor. I was trying to get him to go to bed, but I went downstairs to put something away. I heard the monitor crackle and then heard him talking. What freaked me out about this was that a woman's voice answered him back. We were the only 2 people in the house. This client's wife had died a few years ago. I'm convinced that she comes to visit him every so often. She was a lovely woman, from what I heard, but that's the last thing you want to hear at 1 in the morning. I'm an EMT and eat this stuff up. I'm not necessarily religious, I'm on the fence about it. But I've experienced some stuff I cannot explain. I can recall one fairly well. I was in the basement of the hospital grabbing a new gurney, as ours was ripped apart by a violent patient. At 3 a.m., the PICU on the 3rd floor was under lockdown, with no visitors allowed in the hospital. The basement storage unit was brimming with items, leading me to believe that my shirt had caught on something. Then it happened again, only this time I heard a little girl's voice, crystal clear, say, "I'm lost." My heart was pounding, I felt all the hairs on my body stand up, and I called my partner down to help with the gurney. I've talked to nurses, CNAs, and even some physicians who have had weird experiences, especially in the ICU and hospice side. I used to work in a nursing home. The residents in certain rooms would complain about a man in their room at night, but hallucinations are common in the elderly, so it wasn't really noticed. One night I was mopping the dining room, which had huge windows overlooking the garden. It was around 1 a.m., so it was pitch black outside and low lighting inside. I had this horrible feeling of being watched, so I looked up, and reflected in the window was a man behind me. He had on a brown suit, a bowler hat, and the cruelest look on his face. He grinned, and his mouth was too big. This happened in seconds, and when I turned around, there was obviously no one there, but I'll never forget that look of evil on his face. I paid more attention to the residents after that, and they'd all seen the same man. He just enjoyed terrorizing people. I worked for a major railroad. My territory was among the earliest railroad lines in the U.S., started in the 1840s. The terrain is relatively level, but there is a fairly long, steep grade between 2 towns. One cold night in winter, my train got hit by the hotbox detector. This is a device that senses overheated bearings as a train passes over it. We stop at the base of the hill, and I walk back to the indicated axle number to check it out. It seems fine, so I check the next 10 axles on either side per the rules. Finding no overheated components or stuck handbrakes, I start walking back to the head end. The snow had melted and frozen into an ice crust, so every step I took was loud and distinct. After a little bit, I start hearing another set of steps behind me. Assuming a manager had come out to test me, I turned around, ready to cuss them out for bugging me. But I didn't see anyone. I thought maybe it was an echo or something and resumed walking. After 2 or 3 steps, I heard boots in the snow right behind me and to my left, on the shoulder of the ballast. I ignore it, but it's clearly not my walking rhythm. I can hear the ballast under my feet, but only soft crackling steps behind me. I stop, turn around, and this time I hear 3 clear steps after I stop. I hurried to my engine and told my engineer to get going. A couple of years later, I was researching an interesting old pump house I had found while hiking and stumbled on a newspaper article about a Civil War veteran and engineer on my railroad who, along with his fireman, was killed when his locomotive's boiler exploded at the same location I heard those steps in the snow. I was uncomfortable at the time, but after reading about that accident, I felt bad if it was indeed a spirit stuck there. But at least he had 120 years of overtime waiting for him. I started my nursing career at a small and very old urban hospital. The hospital was so small that it was on the verge of closure. I worked in labor and delivery, and we were the only unit left. There were a bunch of clinics and offices, but they weren't open nights/weekends. One night, we had to do a reasonably emergent CS on a patient who was from out of town. Meaning she didn't have a support person with her. As far as I remember, the CS was going well, I was scrubbed in. We were in the middle of it when the patient stopped responding to the anesthetist. Her vitals were all normal, but she just stopped talking to her and stopped responding to questions. I could hear the anesthetist ask her, "Hey, are you okay?" a few times. After a few minutes, The patient started responding again, and all was well. I had her in the recovery room, just me and her, the babies were in the NICU, and things were pretty straightforward. But I did mention to her the strange episode during the CS. She said, "I saw my grandmother in the OR." I was so scared, and I asked her to hold my hand, but she told me that she couldn't touch me. That was certainly a shocking revelation for a 23-year-old to hear at 3 a.m., in a room far from any of my coworkers, in a very old and empty hospital. I work for a company that cleans apartment complexes and supermarkets, and I'm hired to clean basement corridors from time to time in said apartment complexes. After unlocking the door to one of said corridors, I made sure I had my supplies and that I locked the door behind me. Walking down the corridor with a swivel mop in hand, pushing it along as I listened to music, I noticed something at the corner of my eye, and it almost made me jump. I turned around and saw a kid standing a few feet away from me. I didn't ever even hear him approach, which startled me. A child, no older than 4, was alone for some reason. He was wearing a green jumper, sweatpants, and typical kid socks in garish colors. It was like seeing myself back in the 90s, his whole outfit looking either based on that look or some really old hand-me-downs. "Hi," he said simply, fidgeting where he stood. Gobsmacked, I answered, "Hi. Can I help you?" "What are you doing?" he asked curiously, and I simply answered, "I'm cleaning. I need to ensure the corridors are clean and free of dust." Thereafter, I got no answer. He just stood there and fidgeted while looking at me. I continued cleaning for a minute or something, and before I regained the courage to speak up again and ask the kid where his parents are or what apartment he lives in so I can send him back, I turned back around, and the kid was just completely gone. I patrolled down the corridors and made sure he wasn't hiding anywhere or running around playing on his own. When I reached the door, it remained locked, and I couldn't find him anywhere. I hate cleaning the corridors even more nowadays after this incident. This occasion happened in the early 2000s. I was a young cadet learning the ropes aboard a cutter on patrol in the North Pacific. I was standing the bridge watch on mid-shift, midnight to 4 a.m. It was a quiet, moonless night, and the seas weren't bad, rolling enough that you had to watch your footing but not uncomfortable. I had gone outside onto the bridge wing to look around, and after a few minutes I turned to come back inside. Through the window, looking in, I saw a figure in a yellow coat standing on the far side of the bridge. I didn't think much of it and walked around to the side door to come back in. When I came back in, the figure was gone. The helmsman was at his station and hadn't moved. The navigator and deck officer were in the back at the chart table going over some charts. No one had a yellow jacket on, and why should they, as it wasn't raining, it was a clear night. I asked something along the lines of was anyone up here in a yellow jacket? To which the deck officer replied, "No, where did you see him?" I explained what I had seen, and the deck officer just said, "That was Gordon, people see him from time to time." Of course that warranted further explanation, so the legend goes that Gordon, after the Gordon fisherman because no one really knew his name anymore, was the captain of a fishing boat that sank in the 80s. The cutter responded and rescued most of the crew, but the captain had unfortunately drowned before he could be saved. The body was kept on board until the cutter made port some weeks later, and since then the image of the fisherman in a yellow slicker would be seen from time to time, usually near the bridge, still standing a watch. The image/spirit/ghost/whatever was seen as a good omen. A diligent sailor watching over the ship and keeping her safe, maybe in gratitude for rescuing his crew from being lost to the sea. Either way, no serious mishaps have befallen the ship, so maybe it's true. I would have thought they were pulling my leg if I hadn't seen him before I heard the story. I'm not superstitious, but strange things happen on the mid-watch, so who knows? I work at a facility for folks with disabilities. The other night it was around midnight, and I was walking out of the laundry room. I saw a resident's doorknob turning like they were trying to open their door and couldn't get it. So I went over and opened the door. The resident was in bed under the covers asleep. I then proceeded to another part of the building. While there, I heard a scream. Yelling, "Mommy, mommy, help me, please, mommy." It was a female voice that I didn't know. So I immediately went to check on everyone. No one was awake. Everyone was sound asleep. Another night the TV and CD player started playing at the same time. I grew up on a huge working ranch, and as a result, we ended up having weird experiences depending on what portion of the property we were working on. I say I worked on things lightly, as I mostly just did grunt work since I was young at the time. Anyhow, we'd have experiences while working on old houses, like tools going missing or doors slamming while we remodeled old settler houses to become livable again. There were several instances when we heard strange noises or animal cries that none of the old-timers could identify. Heck, there was one mountain my grandfather flat out told me we should never go to at night. Never gave us a reason, just said we'd be stupid to do it. One that really stands out to me, though, was my grandfather, my dad, my stepbrother, and myself all out on ATVs picking star thistle. We took a break and basically just parked in the gravel creek bed and casually talked. My grandpa kept his ATV on and idling until we heard the distinct sounds of whistling in the distance. This was the kind of whistling we actually used, too, to herd sheep. The whole area used to be fully focused on sheep for wool, but that was 50-ish years ago now, if not longer. Ours should be the only herd, and it was small at 50-ish sheep. Also, they just so happened to be 3 miles upstream and not here. Well, despite our confusion growing as we heard the sounds of hollering and yipping coming now too, we politely made sure all ATVs were off and looked in the direction the sounds were coming from. It was coming from uphill, where a massive rock outcropping stood blocking our view. The sounds grew closer until the point where a herd of something should have come around the outcropping. But no. Didn't happen. Just as the noise reached its peak, it abruptly became quiet. We waited, looking at each other as if to say, "Did you hear that too?" My stepbrother grabs his rifle, slowly shoulders it, and then starts walking towards the area. He never found a thing. We all dismounted and looked for tracks, signs of people, nothing. My grandfather noted that we were near an old orchard, and it wouldn't be unheard of for that old property to have had a herd of some sort in the past. He simply shrugged and said it was probably ghosts in that can't quite tell if he is joking way, and then we went back to work. I used to work overnights at a homeless shelter for domestic violence survivors. I was primarily responsible for monitoring security footage and opening doors for individuals, as each hallway had its own lockdown. There were several times out of the corner of my eye I'd see doors open and close with no footage of people buzzing through them. I'd go back and re-watch, and the footage would glitch out for a couple of seconds, but not enough time for someone to get through, and I would have been able to see them before or after if someone had. I brought it up to my manager, and she said she had experienced the same thing and no one knew why. Maybe some sort of glitch in the security system itself, but unsure. Several people overdosed on the grounds, so it wouldn't surprise me if it was haunted in some way. So I started this job a month ago. I'm an overnight security officer in one of multiple buildings on a large campus. I signed an NDA, so I really can't be more specific to potentially identify my client. Anyway, I started my job training on the first shift, and I'll admit I was skeptical when I started hearing the stories. Things moving, doors opening and closing, and actual full-bodied apparitions in the middle of the day. In one of the older buildings, a little girl is seen throwing objects. Stuff of that nature. I'm usually pretty sensitive to the paranormal, having experienced it often growing up. I've experienced many unexplainable things. But the buildings I trained in didn't feel threatening, so I dismissed it. I've been working my regular shift for 2 weeks now. On my first day on third shift, I was checking a bathroom when I saw a shadowy figure lean out and glare at me before the door shut. I felt paralyzed. I didn't feel safe. But I brushed it off again, told myself it would be fine. I need this job. It's the only place in my area that pays a livable wage. I endure every noise and feeling of danger as I walk through the building. And I told myself it's an adjustment period. We're new to each other. It will calm down with time. Yesterday I learned that my building specifically was built on top of a historical graveyard. Specifically a graveyard for slaves and their descendants. Upon purchasing the property, my client exhumed the bodies and relocated them across the street. But their original resting place is under my feet every night when I go into work. Tonight I was checking the emergency exits, which are enclosed in a stairwell. I checked the door was secure and there were no hazards. Then I tried to re-enter the building from the stairwell, and the door was held tight. I would open it just enough to see no one on the other side, and it would slam shut again. A few minutes after I finally got out of the stairwell, I entered a loading area and was immediately confronted by a massive shadow figure, hat man. At least 7 feet tall and watching me. I took a deep breath and kept going. Funnily enough, tonight was probably the least threatened I've felt since starting working nights. I work at a hotel, and the building I work at was built in the 1800s. While I was downstairs collecting coffee station supplies, I felt like someone, an anxious someone, was pacing beside me because I heard shuffling in the room beside the shelves I was collecting from. I got very nervous because I thought someone else was down there with me, even though you had to have a key to even get downstairs and in that storage area. I gathered what I needed as quickly as I could and started to fast walk out until I heard footsteps running behind me. I turned around and slammed my back against one of the double doors, items still in my arms. Depending on the attack, I was prepared to defend myself, but there was no one. Then I heard what sounded like a man scream in the stairwell going back upstairs. I was paralyzed. I dropped everything to pull the radio out of my hoodie and called for security to come get me. If I couldn't pull myself from the spot, then he could, and I didn't want to be alone up those stairs. He said that was the whitest he'd ever seen a white person get. I work overnights in an assisted living facility, ALF, that mostly deals with dementia and Alzheimer's. When someone who's lived there for a while starts actively dying, it's like the rest of the residents get restless. Like they know death is pacing the halls. Often, the restless residents will, one by one, start talking while in their rooms. I used to go in and check on them, asking what they're saying and who they're talking to. They all respond, the girl in the closet. I have closed closets. I have left small lights on for them. I have gotten one up and taken her to the living room with me, and still, she stared at the doorless linen closet in the hall and chattered away, not always comprehensible. It only stops after the actively dying patient finally passes. A few residents who have passed started talking to the girl in the closet just days before they sharply declined and started dying. One of the most recent was in October. I'd go in at night to change her diaper, and she'd be propped up on an arm in her bed, chatting away to the girl. She smiled at me, one time, and pointed at the closet and said, "Oh, haven't you met her? She's such a lovely girl. See, this is my nephew I told you about." I said I'd be back later and didn't go back for almost an hour, when she was asleep again. I and my cousin used to work for a family friend of his that owned a huge cow and horse farm. We were pretty young at the time and didn't really do serious work, mostly just painting the barn and checking up on the horses and cows that just gave birth or something else. But it was worth the penny. One day he and I were working late, so we were bringing the horses in for the night because it was cold as hell and we didn't have any covers for them. We were also checking up on a mama cow that had just given birth to a baby, so they were in a special paddock. So basically there were 5 fields, 2 small and 3 huge. The smallest one was the one with the cow and baby in it, so while my cousin was bringing in the cow, I was on the other side of the fields checking up on the cow, and eventually electricity just cut out. I nearly shat my FKN pants, and my cousin had the flashlight, and my phone was dead, so I was in the dark, just scared out of my mind. Eventually I just felt my way around and hid with the cows until someone would come get me since everybody knew where I was. And I waited, and nothing happened. Maybe 10 minutes went by, and now I really started stressing. Being a maybe 14-year-old teen boy with a sister that loves horror movies, I knew that shit could go down any second, but I just lay there for another 5 minutes, still nothing. Now I really started panicking. I didn't know what to do, I just tried to sleep until someone got me. All of a sudden I hear a lady's voice yelling my name like, "Alex? Alex, where are you?" Finally someone is here, and also the light just randomly turned on. The best part is I recognized the voice, it was my mom. I was so relieved I just ran out of the paddock and looked around. But there was nobody, the yelling stopped, and the electricity cut off again, and at this point I started crying out of being scared and angry. I just sent it through the fields as fast as I could, screaming for anyone to get me. I saw the light from the generator turning on in the barn, and I just ran until I got there. I ran inside and yelled out for my cousin, but no one answered. Out of pure anger I just screamed, "Duck!" And I ran into my boss's house, and there was everyone, my boss, my cousin, my boss's wife, and hell, even my dad was there stressing out because they couldn't find me. Everyone ran to get me as soon as I came in the house. I was dirty with tears in my eyes and a knife in my hand. "Where have you been? It's been an hour since your shift ended." I told them what happened, and when I was about to tell them that my mom yelled my name, I remembered that my mom passed about 1 to 2 years ago and that was definitely not her. I worked in a newly built hospital that was haunted. We had lost no patients there, but according to research a coworker did, the land had been part of a large farm, and where the hospital was located had been where the slave quarters were. I have seen at least 2 people who were there 1 minute and gone the next. They looked completely normal until they disappeared. Call buttons in empty rooms would go off. There was a small sitting/waiting room on one floor with a TV and coffee machine. The TV would turn on when no one was there. There was also a misty shape seen in a stockroom by multiple people. Different employees sometimes heard faint whispers when no one was there. One girl in housekeeping quit because of weird situations. She cleaned the OR rooms at night and had a dedicated equipment cart that was stored inside the OR area. She would have to scrub up and dress in scrubs, a mask, gloves, and shoe and hair covers to go into the area. She would pull out her cart and go inspect the first room to clean up anything before she took her cart in to do the floors. Many times, when she would come back to her cart, all her tools would be lined up on the floor beside the cart. This was an area with badge access, so they knew who came in. She also texted me a pic of a powered-off computer screen and said she felt like she was being watched. Asked me to put it on my Photoshop program and see if I could see anything. I enlarged and lightened, and there were 3 distinct but faint faces on the screen. She quit soon after. Lady riding bike on rural road at 1:30 a.m. Hey everyone, this morning I had the most paranormal experience. I work late security shifts at a warehouse in rural Australia, and I do the Saturday shift from 5:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m., so I always get back home at 1 o'clock in the morning, but this morning I had the scariest experience of my time working there. As I was coming home, the reflectors of a bike were visible in front of me. I was really confused as to A. I couldn't figure out who was riding a bike at that time, and I couldn't figure out B. Who rides a bike on a rural dirt road? As I got closer, I saw a skinny, pale figure with long hair and a pink dress on, riding a bike down the road. I started to panic and get worried, as this was strange. I didn't know what was wrong with them, but this was unusual to see at this time. I sort of slowed down and waited for them to move so I could go around, but they didn't move at all and didn't look at me. I beeped my horn a few times, and they pulled over to the side, and I sped up and left. They just looked at me until I was out of my rearview mirror, really scary and shocking, and I'm going to be doing some day shifts now. I've told my coworkers, and they keep calling me a wuss, but some believe me and also don't want to work the night to morning. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I used to be a security guard for a place called Southside on Lamar. I will call it Soul from now on. It's just minutes away from downtown, and it's also where many low-key celebrities lived, like Andre 3000 and Erykah Badu's son Seven and many others. This place was an old Sears factory in the early 1900s. I've heard stories from coworkers about people jumping off the roof and other means of suicide and just overall how haunted and scary the place was, but I would just laugh it off and pay it no mind. That changed when I started to see and hear things for myself that I couldn't explain. One July afternoon, I was patrolling inside the building, doing my daily log, and I heard a loud gunshot come from inside the Soul. There was an old handicapped resident who had just taken his life, and I was one of the people allowed to go inside and document what I had seen and not touch anything, of course. The Dallas Police Headquarters is literally across the street, so they showed up pretty quick along with the ambulance. Needless to say, it was very traumatic, and my boss let me take 2 weeks off. After my 2-week leave, I returned to work, and for a while, everything went smoothly without any significant issues. Then I was assigned to work the overnight shift, which I really didn't want to do, but I accepted because it paid approximately $2 more per hour. My first night I stayed outside of Seoul. I was supposed to walk all throughout the building for my daily log, but I just couldn't work up enough courage to do it, so I just wrote BS down as if I did my job. My second night, I did go inside, and I had one of the scariest experiences ever. There was this daycare center on the first floor that residents could take their kids to, I guess, while they were at work, and the place is very old, so old that there was a bomb shelter in the daycare that looked like a sewage tunnel, and I've heard about a kid dying in that bomb shelter. I don't remember the details. Anyway, as I was walking up to the entrance of the daycare, I could hear something inside. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like someone was trying to aggressively open a bag of chips. It was around 2 to 3 a.m., so there wasn't supposed to be anybody in there, and the door was locked. The noise got a bit louder, so I turned on my flashlight, opened the door, and the noise suddenly stopped. I didn't see anything or anyone in there, it was pitch black. I closed the door, secured it, and swiftly left the premises. I informed my boss about the situation, to which he responded with a chuckle, suggesting that it might have been a problem with the pipes. Although I agreed to avoid appearing crazy, I had a deep-seated suspicion that this wasn't the case. It just didn't sound like anything I've heard before. A lot of really old doors and windows that lead to nowhere are still inside the building. If you are from Dallas, I recommend you check the place out yourself. I've worked in healthcare for over 20 years now, and I have a couple of stories from working in nursing homes of seeing the figure in black shooting across the hall, and then in the next 24 hours a resident will die, and then in less than a week another one will pass as well. But my favorite story is this. I worked at a tiny hospital, maybe 30 beds, it has been around for many years. In the basement is, of course, the old morgue, and there is one elevator that goes from the basement to the main floor outside the nurse's station. This elevator would come up in the middle of the night randomly, and the doors would open, and all the staff would get up to go find the patient who just passed away. One night my coworkers and I were sitting at the nurse's station, and down the short hall to our right, we heard this TV come on, and the volume was up as loud as it could go. One of my CWs and I walked down said hall to find the TV to turn it down. There is one room down that hall that maintenance has the door closed and do not enter signs on the door. After looking in all the open rooms, there is no other room but the closed one to look in. We open the door. There is nothing in this room except the TV. I walked in, turned off the TV, and said, "Stop that. There is a sick baby next door who needs to sleep, so please be quiet." I walked out and closed the door with no further incidents with the TV. I used to work on an oncology ward as a nurse. Our side rooms were kept for end-of-life patients on palliative care, and one patient that we had been nursing for a good few weeks died early one morning. Last offices had already been done by the night staff, and the patient was moved to the hospital morgue, so all that remained was to clear the room of personal belongings and tidy up. I sent a student nurse that I was mentoring at the time to do this whilst I got on with the drug round. The student had known the patient fairly well and was comfortable with this job. About 10 minutes later, a colleague came to me and told me that my student had come flying out of the side room, white as a sheet, and was sobbing in the staff room. I went to find out what the problem was, and the student told me she had been clearing out the sink area in the bathroom, had glanced up, and had seen the deceased patient reflected in the mirror looking at her over her shoulder. My student was a sensible girl, not given to hysterics, but for the remainder of her placement on that ward, she would not go near that side room. Back when I was in college, my roommates and I used to work at our event center on the weekends, usually working events, cleaning up, and setting up for the next venue. We usually had roughly 10 to 15 people working these shifts from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. There were rumors that the event center was haunted, but I never really paid attention to them. Here are some interesting things that happened to us. One, my roommate was a shift supervisor and had the privilege of walking through the center after all of us left to make sure all doors were locked and to eventually lock up the front door. We had just finished setting up for a basketball game for the next day, and he was doing his rounds. As he was checking the gym, he decided to shoot a few baskets. As he shot a basket, he heard someone yell "hello" from the gangplank above the basketball court. He looked up and saw a person looking down at him, not dressed in our uniform. He immediately shouted at the person and asked them what they were doing there. The person smiled at him, then moved back into the shadows and disappeared. This was creepy, as it was around 3:15 a.m., no one was in the building, and he had made sure all the upper floors were locked earlier. There was only one door to the gangplank, and he had made sure it was locked prior to his going to the basketball court. Furthermore, the gangplank is not too wide, so there was really nowhere the person could hide. My roommate hurriedly locked the front door and got out of there. 2. I usually clean the locker rooms during my shift. They are by the arena floor and are pretty remote from the rest of the cleaning and setup crew. There were times when it would get really cold in some spots for no reason. I would also hear faint voices talking and laughing from the showers but would find no one there. Also, the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up constantly for no reason. When these things happened, I would clean up fast and leave. 3. One time, close to leaving time, I had to use the restroom. I went into the main restroom and sat down to do my business. Even though it was pretty early in the morning, I did my routine of checking the stalls to make sure I was the only one in the restroom, out of habit. While I was in the middle of doing my business, the toilet next to me flushed, the sink turned on and off, and then the lights shut off. I was in pitch darkness and had no way of seeing, as this was prior to cell phones. This literally scared the sh_t out of me, and I cleaned up as best I could and got out of the stall. I thought one of my coworkers had messed with me, but after I turned on the light, no one was there and no one was on my floor when I left the restroom. When I asked the crew about it, no one had been on my floor, as they were all in the office getting ready to go. Work in a trauma/burn ICU. When I was on nights, I had a patient go ballistic, screaming about the dark men, that we were trying to get her, etc. Weird, as she was previously oriented, but maybe she was having a bad dream. Dropped dead during the day shift. I used to work in the emergency department, ED, of a small rural hospital. During the process of transporting a patient to the floor, I noticed an elderly man in the room directly across from the elevator, who was struggling to find the TV button on his chair. Make a note to ask the nurses up there to help, and when I bring it up, they say the patient in the room is female and on comfort care. She's a ward of the state and doesn't have any visitors. Charge and I took a walk down the hall, and sure enough, there were no visitors in the room. Last one. When a curtain is right, attending, and I work, we are the deathly trio. At least one person codes, usually in room 27 or 43. So we're working, and the patient starts to circle in 27 when, from the middle of the unit, another nurse is yelling for help. She walked into her patient's room to find her with her subclavian line out, painting on the walls in blood to protect everyone from the shadow men. When my coworker tried talking her down, the patient saw one of the shadow people in the halls and lost her mind. A few minutes later, we start coding the patient, 27, and are unable to get them back. I used to work at a psych hospital in Michigan on their children's unit. I worked third shift, and the way the unit was set up meant I was alone at the end of a long hall, behind a desk, but where I could see the nurses' station. The kids' doors had to stay shut unless they had a sitter, and that night, we were pretty emptied out in the unit, so all the doors were closed. As I sat down after finishing rounds on the patients, the patient phone rang. It was on a desk separate from the one I sat at and could only have calls come in if the nurse's desk transferred it. Most had their calls screened. It was now 3 a.m., and there was no way anyone was transferring any calls on purpose. I answered but was met with silence. I went to the nurse's station, but the desk was empty. Okay? The nurse came back from the back hall that was empty, commenting on how messy the supply closet had been, but she just killed it. I went back with her to look simply because I wanted to see if she'd really been back there. It looked amazing, for the record. Ha. I went back to my desk, thinking it must have been a fluke. A few minutes pass, and the phone rings again. I go to answer it, and again, I'm met with silence. I could see the nurse talking to another staff member at their station. I unplugged the phone thinking something was wrong and told myself to remember to plug it back in the morning. I went to sit, and the phone rang again. I slowly picked it up and was met with silence, except for what sounded like really soft humming. It was then that I almost lost it because I heard sudden loud crying from one of the patient rooms. Thinking someone was having a night terror, I ran to the room that the sound was coming from and turned on a light. It was one of the empty patient rooms. I wish I was kidding. I quit my job that day. No, thanks. Since leaving, I've heard so many terrifying stories from that place. I work at a low-barrier housing facility for persons with persistent multiple barriers. What this means is we have people who have combination substance misuse issues, mental health conditions, behavior issues, etc. The facility has been operating for 25 years. There have been multiple traumatic and violent deaths. When I found out my office would be at this facility, I got a discussion by current staff about the weird goings-on. I haven't seen much personally, nothing that couldn't be rationalized. But I do have one incident that sticks out and warms my heart. It, too, could also be rationalized away. I had my first client death on Christmas Day of this year. Cause of death is still under investigation. He was a wonderful, honest, kind, and gentle person. He always was so respectful, and I miss him very much. For story purposes I'll call him Mac, his nickname. Now when Mac died, he was found outside a few blocks away from the facility. None of our staff got to say goodbye. This is a reality in my field of work. It was heartbreaking for everyone. The only day that I had any work over the Christmas holidays was to take Mac to an appointment. I was bummed, to say the least. I went in that day just to fill some papers out and tidy some stuff up at my office and also to see if I could get some details on what happened to Mac. I went to the main office at the front of the building, where all the support staff monitor and work out of. All of us who were heavily connected to Mac were in there that day, and I noticed his hat that he was famous for wearing was hung up in the office. Literally the second I mentioned the hat, we all watched the elevator go up to the 4th floor, Mac's floor, open, come down, and open. No one was on either floor to press the button, and as we found out, the elevator should not do that. Mac always came by me and the main office to say hi. It felt like his last pass by the office to say goodbye. Even thinking about it now makes me tear up. Many years ago I briefly had a job that started at 3:30 a.m. The job itself was very boring, but the commute was wild. The world is at its weirdest in the very early morning. Road hazards hadn't been called in yet, so one day I pulled off the freeway and discovered that the off-ramp was completely flooded, deep enough that I have no idea how my car didn't stall. The most interesting finding was that police raids happen around 3 or 4 a.m. when everyone is likely asleep. One day I was nearly to work when I noticed something off ahead of me. I slowed down and came up to a massive police blockade, squad cars everywhere and absolutely crawling with heavily armed officers, but all in absolute silence. They silently waved me down a side street. It was an eerie and unsettling experience. I used to work in a really old Victorian hospital when I was 18 years of age. The staff always talked about the top floor being haunted, but I just thought they were kidding. One night, they were short-staffed, and I was asked to go up and help out. When it was break time, the nurse went on her break first, and I was left on my own to look after the patients who were sleeping. I felt a bit creeped out being on my own but was okay. After a while I was standing watching the patients sleeping, and my shoulder got tapped. Thinking that the nurse was back from her break, I smiled and turned around to say to her, "Wow, that was quick." I turned around and didn't see anyone there. Where did she go? I walked around to see where she had gone, but there was no one. I then realized that I had been tapped on the shoulder by the ghost. It had felt real. I felt the finger poking into my shoulder tip, hard. All the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I got a chill suddenly. Not wanting to panic, I went and sat down at the nurse's station to calm down. After about 10 minutes, the nurse came back from her break, and I smiled and went to go on my break. "Everything okay?" she asked me. "Yeah, fine," I said. I didn't want to tell her what really happened in case she thought I was crazy. After about a week, I finally told someone what happened to me up on the top floor of the hospital. "Oh, that's the ghost up there," I was told. Some people say they see a man in his pajamas when they look in a mirror, but when they turn around, there is no one there. Work in the winter for me is plowing and snow removal. It was late, and I had been out for over 24 hours at this point. I pulled over into a small cul-de-sac with the nearest house being over 100 yards away so I could let the truck stay on so I could stay warm. 6-wheel Mack things are loud. As I was nodding off, there was a very loud bang, and it felt like someone then pulled on my driver's side door handle. Luckily I always lock my truck doors. I immediately threw on every strobe/rear/headlight and started looking around, and I saw absolutely nothing. It scared the shit out of me. Needless to say, I never sleep anywhere other than lit parking lots now. Not really creepy, but something that made me a believer in the paranormal. I was working as an extra helper at an elderly home when I was 21. I wasn't a nurse, but I helped the needy dementia patients and those in palliative care. One person, who we can call Lisa, decided that she was done with this life and welcomed death, meaning she stopped drinking, taking meds, eating, communicating, etc. She was at peace with it all and so calm and clear-minded. Anyway, I started to pay her extra attention, sitting next to her reading random books she had on a shelf, making sure to change position to prevent pressure sores, fixing her pillows just the way she wanted them in her own special way and order, telling her about the weather for the day, and so on. Unfortunately she passed on one of my days off, so I didn't get to say goodbye. I initially believed that was the case. The same night shift as I got back, when I and a colleague were tidying up the kitchen, our assistant alarm went off saying, "Room 12 in need of assistance." I looked at my colleague super surprised, and he was like, "Weird, but I'll go and check so there isn't someone who got in the wrong room." He came back saying, "Nope, no one there, all dark and empty." We brushed it off, and my shift ended. The day after, it happened again as we were cleaning the kitchen, but this time I had another colleague. I was confused again, but she went looking in the room and found nothing unusual. After maybe 10 minutes, the alarm from that room went off again, and I was like, "No way." So I went into the office while my coworker double-checked the room and opened Lisa's file and her alarm button. I'm baffled but took out its battery, in case of a weird glitch maybe. As soon as my coworker and I stepped out of the office, room 12 in need of assistance showed up on my assistant alarm again. My coworker chuckled and said, "I guess Lisa wants you to go into her room and say goodbye, she really must have liked you." I thought she was trying to be funny in this weird situation, and I was like, "No, she isn't there anymore?" Anyway, my coworker sent me off to Lisa's room, so I went inside, in the dark, because I didn't really think of turning the lights on, but I said out loud that I really hoped she was at peace and that I appreciated her company and the books I read for her, and I truly always will remember her for the rest of my life. I went out of that room, and we never had a false alarm from that room again. I have for many years worked in a boutique hotel in a small town in Wales. It is an old building, probably the oldest business in town, having been there for at least 500 years. It neighbors a castle, and evidence suggests some form of hostelry has been on the site since the inception of our town. Anyhow, as I mentioned, it is a very old building and can be slightly spooky when you are left on your own to close up the business at break of day. Among the various things that you have to do to close up the bar is turning certain lights off around the business. It is a 3-story building. The second floor houses the hotel rooms. It is a bigger building than it appears on the exterior, with a great amount of winding corridors. At the top of the stairs on the second floor is the ladies' toilet, which overlooks a function room. At the end of every night, one of my duties revolves around turning the lights off in those toilets. It is a strange and eerie room, and to complete my task, it always goes the same way. I enter, turn off the first light, then the second, and then I run from the room with a cold chill on my neck, hair standing on end, before I turn the final light off and run down the stairs. I know, weird, right? Maybe I'm just being superstitious. That's what I thought until one night I talked to my colleagues. We had gathered after a hard night at work around my colleague's house to smoke cigarettes, drink beer, and watch television, reflecting on the busy evening. I piped up, telling them how I hated turning the lights off in the ladies' toilets and my routine of the chill on my neck running from the room. They looked at me dumbfounded, stating that they do the exact same thing. This was the first time we'd talked about the matter, and independently between the three of us, we found we engaged in the exact same behavior and were equally weirded out by this seemingly ordinary restroom. I have tried to do some independent research into this matter. A rumor going around way back when is that the structure that is now a lavatory was once an apartment and that the woman living there, a long-term resident, had died. I cannot clarify this, as it's been a while since I heard this story. I can't remember who told me it. I asked my boss if he'd ever seen anything but informed me that in his 30-plus years on the property, he had never encountered anything abnormal. There is a picture of a woman in the adjoining function room, but my employers are not sure who it is a picture of. It may just be a junk picture acquired from a charity shop. Furthermore, we have had some odd incidents over the years concerning this room. Despite my reluctance to discuss this room, several incidents involving hotel visitors have occurred over the years. The first is fairly innocuous. In the middle of a busy shift, I received a phone call on the business line from a lady who claimed to have stayed in the building a few days prior. She said she had encountered some odd things during her stay and wanted to know if the building was haunted. I was very busy at the time and didn't have any time to pry. I informed her I did not know and hung up. On another occasion we had another lady claiming to be a psychic stating there was a presence in the lavatory. She gave the reason why I and my other male coworkers felt uncomfortable in said toilet was because it was a female space and that the being that resided there did not approve of us entering. Another lady visiting claimed to see a woman dressed in Victorian clothing whilst visiting the ladies' room. She said she was not frightened by the experience. I'm not sure if she was winding me up or was being honest. Finally, we had an incident of a woman visiting the bathroom. She went upstairs for around 40 minutes. Then there was a large thudding sound, as if someone had fallen over. She came down distraught. I asked what was wrong. She told me that she had exited a cubicle having done her business to find herself in pitch dark. She wouldn't say anything more on the matter and was visibly shaken. So that's about it, really. I find myself in an odd position, as I do not believe in ghosts but cannot deny that the ladies' toilets in my place of work are indeed haunted. I cannot rationalize this, but something creepy is going on in the building. My coworkers and I avoid this area when we can. It's a scary place to be alone at night. I spent several years working in an old, late Georgian-era manor set in the countryside. It's closed now, sadly, but it was home when I worked there to lots of lovely people who had cerebral palsy. The main old part of the house was 3 levels, with the bottom level being dining rooms, laundry, offices, and activities. The middle level was bedrooms, and there was a small staircase to a 3rd floor that was a couple of rooms used as storage for archived records and a toilet. We had a female service user who had the biggest bedroom on the 2nd floor, and it was creepy as hell in that room. Call bells would often falsely go off in that room. She had been developing some, I guess I would call them, mental problems, and no one could figure out what was wrong. She would just scream constantly wherever she was and wouldn't stop if you asked her to stop unless she saw you. So if you called across a room for her to stop, she would ignore you, but if you stood in front of her in her eye line, she would stop for half an hour or so. One evening I was writing daily notes in care plans in the dining room downstairs, and I could hear her screaming, so I thought, I'll just finish my notes and go up, when this really angry male voice suddenly shouted, "Stop it now." To my surprise, she stopped immediately. It was weird because this voice just sounded wrong and disembodied. I can't explain it, I just felt it. Here's the problem, I was the only male staff member on the entire property that night, none of the other service users on that floor could speak, and I didn't recognize the voice, and of course, worst of all, the fact she stopped meant whatever shouted was in her room and she could see it. This was different, all the other service users were in wheelchairs and needed hoists and cot sides to get into bed. I gathered a few staff members to check on her, but we found nothing. A few months later she moved to another room and just stopped screaming altogether. A few years before that we had another service user who had a room over the landing whose room was directly below the storage room. She used to ring her call bell to ask us to tell the people upstairs to stop running about at night. Of course, there was no one up there. Also, one time we had someone from another part of the company who had never been to the home before visit. They were having a look around, and they had used the toilet on the 3rd floor and came down and told our manager they thought it was lovely we allowed children to visit. The manager explained we don't, as we have vulnerable adults, and the guy went white because he had heard children playing outside the toilet door. Just in case anyone thinks it could be an intruder or intruders, all external doors were alarmed, and part of the evening wind down was security checks of all rooms, floors, windows, etc., that had to be signed for. I work in death care as a recovery tech. Meaning I go out and pick people up who have passed away. Once, while working alone, I was picking someone up at a nursing home, totally normal. The decedent had a roommate who was very much alive but sleeping. When I arrived for pickup, I did my usual transfer from bed to gurney, but it was a very cramped space, so I moved in between the gurney and the bed to buckle my person when suddenly I felt something plop on the bed. Startled, I turned around thinking that maybe the roommate had woken up and smacked the bed, but nope. There was a thin curtain separating the two, and it was completely still. There was no movement in the curtain, nor was there anything else that could have triggered the plopping on the bed. Feeling uneasy, I hurried out to my van with the decedent safely on the gurney. Once inside the van, I was typing some notes from the driver's seat. From the corner of my eye, I saw a shadowy figure poke out from behind my seat and then quickly retreat. Again, I was weirded out but decided not to give it attention. Once I arrived at the funeral home, I was doing my usual decedent notes. I had them on a lift and was taking physical appearance notes before placing them in cold storage. While taking these notes, I had this sensation of someone/something approaching me/watching me. As I completed my drop-off, before heading out, I said out loud, "You may not come home with me, I do not allow anything or anyone to attach to me, you must remain here," and did a little full body shake before leaving. Feeling a bit silly, I didn't mention it to my coworkers. A couple of days later, on separate occasions, I had two different coworkers express feeling uncomfortable at the funeral home, feeling like someone was watching them/hearing footsteps at a distance/chills running down their spine, things no one had actively felt before. It wasn't until this decedent was cremated that the spookiness stopped. I used to work as a security guard for Securitas at Kaiser Hospital. So basically I used to work the graveyard shift at a Kaiser hospital from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. My objective was to observe and report, assist visitors, and lock and unlock doors from when they open up and close the hospitals. And then unlocking doors for nurses or when or if those morgue people were pulling up to deliver or take fresh dead bodies to or from the freezer. Then I'd have to go down to the basement, which rarely anybody is there most times, and unlock the freezer room, lol, etc. But anyway, one night at around 3 to 4 a.m. I was called over the radio to go down to the basement for standby to open up the freezer room for the morgue guy who was on the way, 30 minutes out, for a body delivery/pickup at the time. Man, was my anxiety kicking in at this point. I thought, why not go down there early just in case and just wait around? After taking the elevator down to the basement, I made my way over to the freezer room, where I scanned my security ID and opened the door to make sure there was room for the man to deliver/pick up. Oh shit. Literally what I screamed after I saw the morgue guy already inside the room jotting down information on the dead body that he seemed to have brought in already at the time. I started to say sorry for cursing behind him all of a sudden like that because I was caught off guard, and then I tried to introduce myself as the security and tried making conversation with him, but not once did he bother looking back at me or replying. 5 to 10 minutes inside, and not one move from this guy. The same still stance, as if he were almost a creepy statue just looking down at his writing board, faced away, and not once did he turn around to show his face, and he was very oddly quiet. I remember I felt a very cold and weird vibe at the time. While writing on his notepad, what I assume he was doing, because I didn't get a clear view since I was standing like 7 feet behind him, he started to mumble something to himself in a whispery kind of voice for a few seconds, so I thought clearly he was trying to say something to me, so then I said, "I'm sorry, did you say something, sir?" And then the very first words out of his mouth since I was there, in a very clear and deep voice, he said, "Please get out." So, like the respectful human I was at the time, I said, "Okay, yes sir, I'll be right outside if you need me." I had to wait for him to leave so I could lock up after. Keep in mind as I am outside waiting for him to hurry up and do his thing so I can get the hell out of here already, lol, I started raising questions in my head like, how the hell did this guy get in already? About 15 minutes later I get a call over the radio from my supervisor that the morgue guy had pulled up in the parking lot and was waiting for me to unlock the front door at the basement. I made my way down to the front door immediately, about 30 feet away from the freezer room, and unlocked the door for the guy who introduced himself as the morgue guy, I forget the term, forgive me, lol, and told me he was there to deliver/pick up the body from the freezer. I was confused but wasn't too freaked out at the time yet because I thought to myself, maybe that's just a different morgue guy in the room who one of my coworkers let in prior to me coming down just now. But it still didn't make sense because we can't leave those morgue guys in the freezer alone until they leave so we could confirm that the doors are locked. I told the guy at the front door, The rooms are occupied right now, man. There's somebody in there, but I think you could go in there too. I told him to wait as I radioed my supervisor. I told her that the morgue guy is here, but the freezer room is occupied because there's already another morgue guy inside. She called me on my cell phone, and I picked up. She told me there should definitely be nobody inside that room without her knowledge. And she asked if I was sure if there was somebody inside. I said yes, I was inside with this man for a while, but I never saw his face, and he eventually told me to get out. So I respected it and got out of the room. BTW, keep in mind at the time we were always instructed by our boss to stay inside the freezer room with those guys until they were done. I was never supposed to get out, even if they told me to. Anyway, I and the guy made our way down to the freezer room, and again I scanned my card at the door, opened it up, and to my surprise, nobody was inside. Nothing I saw was there. It appeared as if it had never existed. No bed. No man, no body. There were no notebooks present. I let the person in, and he did his thing quick, and I said bye to him, and he left. I was telling him how I really saw someone here and that I even talked to him. But literally there was nobody in the basement at the time. My coworkers thought I was on drugs or something. I know what I experienced. But now that I think back to it, it was no doubt a supernatural experience. Everything was so odd, quiet, and scary during my time inside. He didn't say a single word up until "please get out," the mumbling, his deep, creepy voice. It still gives me chills. About 8 years ago I started working solo 12-hour shifts full-time in an old boiler room. I had worked casually for a couple of years, so I knew the place was creepy, but I've worked lots of creepy places on night shifts over my career. There's always a hum to the place and odd knocks and bangs of pipes occasionally that you just know are routine random boiler room noises. But this was so different. On my first full-time night shift, I had 2 petrifying events within an hour that scared the shit out of me to this very day. I've had scary stuff happen in a house my wife and I rented about 15 years before that made us move, so I'm always in tune to things around me. I wasn't prepared for this. When I finished my dinner, I went to the washroom to flush some leftover dinner down the toilet. When I walked into the washroom, the door that was wedged open suddenly started to close. I made no contact with the door wedge because if I did, it would have gone spinning. I turned around to catch the door with one hand but didn't realize the door was a super solid door. I start to pull it open, but it was like a force was on the other side pulling against me until it was closed. I'm like, WTF? I put my plate down and pull it back open and wedge it. I even looked around the plant to see if someone snuck in and was playing a prank. No one there. That was ducking bizarre, I'm thinking. I flush the food, rinse my plate, wash my hands, and head back to the office. Then about an hour later it gets right ducking crazy. I return to the restroom to relieve myself. When I go to wash my hands, I see hand soap streaked like a spiderweb on the bottom corner of the mirror, about the size of your hand. I'm like, WTF is that? No way you could accidentally create that shape. Especially not noticing last time I was in there. So I soak a paper towel and start to wipe it off the mirror. Then out of the blue a super loud, terrifying scream/whistling sound hits me from behind like a bomb. I jump a foot and almost crap myself and immediately look in the mirror, convinced it was a work buddy who snuck in the plant, which is locked, pulling shit on me. No one was there. I spun around, and every hair on my neck and body had to be on end as I felt this overwhelming, terrifying force and coldness. I fly out of the bathroom into the office, hyperventilating like crazy, scared shitless, trying to make sense of what just happened. I've never been more scared in my life, and I've had a few close calls with death. After a minute or two trying to get my breathing back and heart rate down, I called my wife, no answer. I called my son, no answer. Finally, 5 minutes later, I called my wife again, and she answered. I'm stammering like an idiot, telling her what just happened. Thank God she gets it from our past haunted house we first lived in. It took me hours to calm down, and I couldn't catnap that night nor for the next few months of night shifts. I contemplated quitting, but the pay was the best in the city, so I just couldn't. After I calmed down, a few hours later, I did some research online, as the area I worked in had a lot of history going back 100 years or so, and lo and behold, I came across a local news story from 4 years earlier on ghost sightings in my city. Turns out the building next door had a history of a ghost that, no shit, played with the bathroom door, opening and closing it. I wasn't insane after all, lol. Scary experience during a night shift. I worked in the radiology department of a hospital in Cardiff, Wales, UK, for about 3 years as an admin and clerical officer before getting a promotion to work in medicine. During these 3 years, I saw many things. Nights always seemed the craziest. Once a patient came in with armed police after an altercation that involved a knife in the middle of the city center, and it just so happened the person he had the altercation with was having an X-ray too. This caused a second altercation right in front of me. Chairs were thrown, a trash bin or two, and then a wheelchair. I have witnessed various events, some humorous, some stressful, some heartbreaking, and many bizarre incidents. However, one night, I witnessed something truly terrifying. I would start a night shift about 1900 hours and then work until 8:30 the next morning. This was the standard night shift for our department. We would usually do 3 nights in a row before doing 4 days off. After the third night, you were ready to sleep for a week. Strangely, this was my first night out of the 3, so I wasn't at all tired. It started off normal. I arrived at the department and took over from the day staff. I logged into my PC. During this time we usually would set up our phones or tablets to watch movies or the latest TV series, as there would be a lot of downtime between patients. As previously mentioned, the initial hours were unremarkable, a typical night in radiology. Then my break time arrived. Before I continue, let me explain the layout of this hospital. This hospital is the largest in Wales. It's a teaching hospital, and it's pretty old. The tunnels or catacombs are now the best way to get around this hospital. These consist of very dimly lit corridors, old abandoned rooms, tunnels, and other creepy, decrepit areas. The morgue is also found in these corridors. So it's not a nice place to be during the day, let alone in the middle of the night. But it's the quickest way to get places if you're staff. There have always been rumors and mumblings of strange things happening in these tunnels. Some people say they saw ghosts in old-fashioned porter uniforms taking wheelchairs to pick up patients. Others report seeing shadows trailing behind them. However, a person in an old nurse's uniform from the 1970s claims to have attacked them. This place is creepy even at the best of times. But for me, it never really fazed me. I've been down there hundreds of times before. The worst experience up to this point was having a sluice pipe drip human waste on my head. That in itself was a horror show. But tonight would be something altogether different, maybe not even of this physical world. As I mentioned earlier, it was a very quiet night. I had been watching the latest series of One Piece because I'm a geek. During my downtime, I was a radiographer, or radiology technician, for my American friends out there, came to take over and cover me for my break. I decided to go to the 5th floor, where the sanctuary, multi-faith chapel, was located. On a night shift, it was one of the most peaceful places in the hospital. But to get there I had to walk through the tunnels to reach the nearest elevator. I set off on my journey, which would usually take about 15 minutes. I scanned my key card at the main entrance to the tunnels and then proceeded to walk through. 2 minutes after entering, I felt as if someone was walking behind me. It being a busy hospital and basically the tunnels acting like the highway, I didn't think anything of it. Suddenly I heard panting, like someone was trying to catch their breath after going for an intense run. So I turned around to check and saw nothing. A bit strange, but I thought it was nothing. Perhaps it was the creaking of one of the pipes above my head or the sound of a generator pumping. So I carried on walking, but I kept feeling like someone or something was watching and following me. Out of sheer confusion and fear, I missed my turn toward the elevators and found myself in a large section of the tunnels that I had never been in before. The tunnels were littered with old stretchers, beds, hospital furniture, and equipment. Some of this stuff was over 50 years old, maybe older, just left to decay in a dark, smelly, decrepit, and dusty corridor. This was starting to really creep me out because in all of this confusion I realized I was lost. It almost felt like I had fallen into the back rooms. Everything looked the same. I could feel a tightening in my chest and the start of a panic attack. I remember clutching my chest and running down a corridor trying to find a signpost or something to tell me where I was. I sensed that something was watching me, growing stronger. Suddenly, I felt something hit my arm with force, almost like someone using a baseball bat. I recall falling to the ground, dragging myself across the floor towards the cold, dusty wall, and desperately searching around for an explanation for what had just struck me. Then something caught my eye. It was a black mist with glowing red eyes. The object hovered in the middle of the corridor, about 20 meters away from me. Was this the thing that had been stalking me the entire time? I got back up and sprinted. I ran down what felt like 100 different corridors until I found a housekeeper, janitor. He asked me what was wrong because I looked pale. But I couldn't get any words out. He then grabbed me by the arms with a firm grip and said, "Did you see it too?" That was the last time I ever stepped foot in the tunnels. To this day I hear rumors of strange things. I'm not sure what I saw that night. Maybe I was tired, maybe I was stressed, or maybe it was something else? Why else would the janitor ask me if I had seen it too? What else is down there? Well, I can tell you one thing for sure. I won't be going to find out. Thanks for taking your time to listen to this. This is a story my grandpa swore was true. When my grandpa was a young man, he worked for the railroad. He made good money, and since he wasn't married yet, he had a nice car for that time, and on the weekends, he liked to go out with his friends. He was headed back on a Friday and was running late to a dance that night, so he took a shortcut on a pretty curvy road. The sun was setting, and he was headed west, and then he broke up over a hill. He was speeding, and suddenly, braking over the top of a hill, he became blinded by the sun, but in the last second, he could just make out that someone was standing in the road. He swerved to miss the person, went off the road down into a ravine, and slammed into a tree. He must have passed out, because the next thing he remembered was hearing the voice of a young man saying, Mister, are you all right?" Grandpa said his head was splitting and his knee felt like it was on fire, but he was alive. The kid helped him out of the car, gathered Grandpa's duffel bag, helped him up the bank, and sat him on the ground near the road. He could see an old house nearby, and Grandpa asked the kid if that was his house. The kid answered, "Yay." It was then that Grandpa noticed the boy had a hairlip and spoke with a strong lisp. He was a pudgy boy, pale and redheaded. He looked friendly enough, and when Grandpa asked him if he had a phone at his house, the boy shook his head and said, "No phone." Grandpa asked if his folks were home, and he said nope, and he said he didn't know when they'd be back. Grandpa then asked how far the nearest neighbor was, and the boy said it was the last place he'd passed with the long white fence in front. Grandpa thought back and figured it had to have been 6 miles or so. The boy said, "You can come to my house," so the boy helped Grandpa limp up the long driveway up to the rundown old house. The house was cold even though it was a warm June evening, and Grandpa could see there was no central heating or even a wood stove, but there was a large fireplace and hearth in the kitchen. Grandpa asked if the house was always so cold, and the boy said, "I'm always cold." Grandpa said, "If you go get some wood, I'll start a fire." The boy came back with a big armload of wood, so Grandpa started a fire, and the wood was pretty dry, so in no time there was a big fire going, and the boy stood so close to it, rubbing his arms and soaking up the heat, that Grandpa said to him, "You better be careful, buddy, you're going to get burned." The boy only repeated, "I'm always cold." Grandma asked the boy if he was hungry because he had some sandwiches in his bag, but the boy said he'd already had his supper. Grandpa ate his sandwich while the boy still stood in front of the fire, too close for Grandpa's comfort, but he didn't say anything more. He looked around the house, and it seemed like there hadn't been anyone there for a long time. It started getting dark, and the boy turned from the fire and said, "You can sleep in my bed, I'll keep the fire going." And Grandpa says, "I don't want to put you out of your bed, and are you sure none of your neighbors won't be passing by? Maybe he could get help with his car." The boy said, "Nobody ever comes up this far, they're scared of the ghosts." Grandpa said that shook him up a bit and said, "What ghosts?" The boy replied, "Everyone says there are ghosts here, but I've never seen them. The only thing I'm scared of is nightmares." Grandpa said, "You have nightmares?" The boy said, "Yep. Every night. Same dream. A giant hog chases me and tries to eat me, but I wake up." Grandpa asked him, "Did you ever get chased by a pig in real life?" And the boy said, "Yeah. He had picked up a sow's baby by its leg and shook it so it was squealing, and the pig chased him and knocked him down, and he got bitten up by the sow pretty bad." Grandpa said, "Well, that's probably why you have the nightmares." The boy just nodded his head. Grandpa said he was getting pretty tired and was hurting pretty badly and said, "Thank you for letting him sleep on his bed," which was over in the corner of the room near the fireplace. The boy said he'd keep the fire going and watch over him while Grandpa slept. Grandpa said he woke up with a start from the dream he had. He had the same dream the boy told him about. A huge sow was chasing him, and he woke up just as the sow was about to attack him. The boy was still sitting there in front of the fireplace, there were only coals left, and the sun was coming up. Grandpa limped outside to take a pee off the porch, and he said he could hear a tractor in the distance. He limped over the field and waved his arms until the farmer saw him. He sat and waited because the farmer was a good distance away. He asked the farmer if he could pull his car out of the ravine, and the farmer said yes and asked if Grandpa was all right. He told him yes, and Grandpa rode on the wheel well of the tractor till they got to the place where he went off the road. The farmer asked him, kind of in astonishment, "When did you run off the road?" Grandpa said it last night, just before sunset. The farmer replied, "Where did you spend the night?" Grandpa told him the story about the boy in the road and how he slept there last night. The farmer's face went white, and he said, "You slept there?" And Grandpa said yes. "Why?" The farmer said, "I'd heard the place was haunted, but I never believed it." Grandma said, "Well, the boy said everyone said they thought ghosts lived in that house. The farmer looked right at Grandpa and said, "I guess they do. That boy was killed by the family so over a year ago." The farmer said the family all moved down south right after the funeral. They were so overcome with grief, they couldn't stand living there in that house another day. It's been empty ever since. I and another nurse went into a patient's room. I'm sure they were either in hospice or on their way out. I was showing the patient to the oncoming nurse and expressed my concerns. We kept the main light in the room off, but there was still plenty of light to see the patient. While we were discussing the patient at the foot of the bed, the lights in the main room spontaneously turned on. Immediately, I got goosebumps and told the nurse, "Well, that's my sign to GTFO." I had a very superstitious upbringing and knew not to stick around to find out. The light switch was probably 10 feet away from us and maybe 3 to 4 feet from the door. Basically, you couldn't turn the light on without being noticed, unfortunately for us. When the lights turned on, no one was in the room. After recounting it, another came to my station and jokingly said, "I heard death came to visit." That wasn't funny to me, but I guess to knock nurses, these things happen all the time. Another incident involving a hospice patient occurred. In summary, as I passed a physical therapy room, I noticed a tall, cloaked, shadowy figure observing the hospice patient. I had to do a double take, but by then, they were gone. The experience left me shaken for the next few days. I knew it was the Lady Death coming to check on her next person. Honestly, I thought the patient would have passed that same day but lived on for a few more days. And sorry, y'all, but I got one more as a bonus. This was when I was a CNA. There was a patient who spent all their time and energy in their room until one day they passed away. After they passed, we started to experience the classic paranormal activity you see in the movies. At random, the room's exterior would suddenly emit a strong smell of smoke. Other times, the call light to the now empty room would randomly turn on. This activity persisted for, I think, a few days before the facility had to call a priest in and cleanse the space. Then, all the paranormal activity stopped. I'm an early morning runner, but if I start early enough, Strava says I'm a late night runner, so I think this counts. Last spring I was on the road for work and staying at a hotel with a nice long community trail nearby. The majority of the paved trail lacked lights. No big deal, I had a headlamp. I set out around 3:45 a.m. on a warm morning and made it about 4 kilometers down the trail, where there were some dips in the terrain with cooler air and fog. On my way up from one of those dips, I saw what looked like a park bench and another object about the same height as the bench at the side of the trail. I don't wear my glasses when I run usually, so I couldn't make out what the other object was at a distance. As I crested the hill and approached, I started to realize that it was a person, a young woman with dark hair and shorts and a t-shirt crop top. Normally I try and avoid blinding people with my headlamp, but I was so surprised I shined the light right on her as I ran past. No reaction. It's basically pitch black except for the area illuminated by my light. Had this woman been sitting or slumped, I may have stopped to ask if she was okay, but her kneeling position seemed so deliberate, and I was incredibly unsettled, so I just continued. I found myself looking back for the rest of my run on that trail, just in case, and wound up running an extra 6 kilometers than planned to avoid going back that way. I think about that now whenever I go through a park early in the morning, and it still gives me the creeps. There's a ghost at my work, and I don't know what to do. To preface, I've never been a non-believer, I've actually always wanted to witness it, but I'm now encountering what I think is a ghost, or entity, or misplaced energy, and it's making it hard to work, and I don't know what to do. I work at a large live theater as a sound engineer. I started back in March. The building was built in 1960 but has a large attachment for the second theater that was built in 2001. They did the addition on the cheap. What I mean is, there is floor 2.5, 3, etc. If you've ever worked in a live theater environment, you know that the catwalk isn't near the sound/lighting booth. My point is the building is a mess. So a huge part of my job is picking up the pieces from the people who worked before me and trying to make sense of it. There's a room called 301. It's called that because it's actually at the highest point of the building, and it's the only room there. I'm in there a lot because that's where we store all the sound cables that are larger than 25 feet. There are several push-button light switches that are not motion-activated nor on timers. I've tested them. The hallway to get to 301 from my office is odd. It's this weird labyrinthian staircase arrangement. Anyway, the hallway to get to 301, it's pitch black if the lights go out. It's all concrete, and there are no windows. I was working up there one day labeling cables by length, and the hallway light turned off. I got pissed because I assumed it was this weird stage manager working on a show in the booth connected to the hallway, so I stormed down there in the dark, and she wasn't there. In fact, It was 3 hours before she would have gotten there anyway. I'm unsettled, but I go back up, and the lights turn off again. I yell, "Will you knock it the duck off?" And they turn back on. I honestly just thought it was a fluke, and I let it ride. Hand to God, the next day, a giant set piece on one of the stages where I was working as the soundboard operator breaks. It didn't just break, it was smashed. It was on a sturdy platform. I was the first one who left the theater after the show and the first one to come in. There is only one explanation. Either someone who works there got really mad at a cake dish, or I managed to piss this thing off. What's odd is the part of the building where I experienced this thing and my hackles go up is the new part of the building. However, after all this weird stuff, I started to think about all the moments I felt uneasy. The first time I felt it was when I had to install speakers under the 1960s stage. The trap underneath is a mess, I'm 6 and my back barely clears the top, and it's easily 100 feet across. I'm not claustrophobic at all, but I had moments where I wanted to leave because I felt like something was watching me. So here's my conundrum. I am a skeptic, but there's something weird going on. It doesn't seem malevolent, but the other part that makes me feel insane, I just know whatever this is as a kid. Today was the first day I felt like it was following me to different parts of the building. I kind of need it to stop because I feel like I'm losing it, but it's palpable. Do you talk to these things? I can't light sage or anything because I'll set off the fire alarms lol. This has been a wild experience. My dead dog still sees me off to work at night. So I've had plenty of what I would consider paranormal experiences before, but this is the only one that's really happened to me consistently. When I was around 10 years old, my family got a beautiful white Great Pyrenees named Kimba. He was an absolute giant, but he was also the sweetest and most gentle dog I'd ever been with. He was very quiet, and as he got older, he spent most of his time sleeping and breaking up fights between our two other, smaller dogs. His favorite spot to sleep in by far was in the corner hallway right in front of the house's master bedroom. This is also just to the left of my own bedroom door. He slept on his side and took up almost the whole hallway, lol. Whenever I'd leave my room at night and pass by him sleeping, I'd always wave at him and smile. He loved my mom and me and would always follow us to the door whenever we left the house. One morning, over 3 years ago now, I was abruptly woken up at like 5:30 a.m. to the sound of my mom crying and shouting right outside my door. Obviously very concerned and distressed, I rushed out of my room and saw her kneeling on the floor, crying next to Kimba, right in his favorite sleeping spot. His body was cool and stiff. The rest of the morning was very sad. Time passed, and we got Kimba cremated. He now sits in an engraved urn above our fireplace. It's been over 3 years since Kimba's passing, but I still see him. I stay up very late each night, and I end up leaving my room late at night a lot to go to the kitchen, bathroom, etc., and every so often I will see Kimba. It's never been very clear, but I can always make out his size, color, and vague shape. Every time I see him, he appears in the same spot where he died, either lying down as if sleeping or getting up as though he's about to follow me into the kitchen. I can only see him for no more than 2 seconds. This has been occurring every once in a while over the past 3 years, but it's become increasingly common over the past few months that I've been working the night shift at my job. Now, I see him at least once a week. I'll leave the house around 10 p.m., usually when the house is already dark, and I'll see him getting up off his resting spot and walking towards me briefly, as if he's about to follow me to the door like he always used to when either I or my mom left. It's comforting to think that he might be sticking around to see me off each night. Every time I see him now, I smile at him and wave goodbye. My mom, who always seems to have a connection to the paranormal for some reason, also tells me every so often that she saw Kimba in that hallway corner. I'm glad it's not just me. Anyway, I feel like seeing ghosts of past pets can't be that uncommon of an experience, so feel free to share your stories if you have any. I'm a nurse at a palliative care unit in an old hospital. I'm a nurse at a palliative care unit in an old hospital. If you're a nurse at one of these units like me or know a nurse, please listen until the end. I could use your help. Throughout my years working at this hospital, I've seen a lot, especially being in a palliative care unit. You see many things other people wish they wouldn't. At some point, we all have to accept things as they are. The unit I work in has 9 beds in 9 different bedrooms, all spread along a long corridor. At the start of the corridor is the lift, and coming out of it, you'd find the cleaning room on your right, where we keep all the cleaning equipment and products, and the nurse's room on your left, along with the entrance through the stairs. Because of building and patient safety, and so we can access the other floors easily if in need, the administration forbade us from locking the stair doors. This isn't ideal, because some of our patients, in their delusions, can go across our room's door unnoticed and will be a danger to themselves, so we always keep the doors closed by tying a bedsheet around the door handles to keep them together. This is important so you know why what comes next started out so strange. The nurse's room is where we'll spend most of the night shifts doing all kinds of activities, including resting and actually sleeping. Usually, late at night, my routine would include checking on all our patients, checking on all the doors and windows to make sure they are all locked properly, checking on the doors to the stairs, and then spending most of the night checking patient files. This night in particular, I had finished with my rounds and was checking on all the cameras. When my nursing auxiliary came into the nurse's room, she asked me if anything else was needed or if she was okay to sleep for a while. I told her she was fine to go to sleep, so she took her shoes off, lay down with her back to the room and me, facing the wall, and went to sleep. I was reading a new patient's file, who was coming into our unit soon. I wanted to know what to expect and how to behave around him when I started hearing footsteps walking up and down the unit's corridor. At first I ignored them, thinking I was just tired and that my ears were playing tricks on me. It wouldn't be the first time. However, as the noises continued, I began to wonder what was happening. I took another look at the cameras, but each and every one of the bedroom and corridor feeds seemed completely normal. The steps, though, kept coming all the way to the nurse's room, stopping about 2 steps away from my door, then turning around and walking back all the way to the opposite end of the corridor. I waited to see if anything changed, but when it didn't, I stood up to go check. That's when one of our patients, the one in room number 7, started calling us frantically. My auxiliary nurse was still asleep, so I walked carefully out of the room, peeked out, and looked around. There was nothing there, and the footsteps had stopped, so I rushed to the patient's room. When I got there, he was shouting frantically, huddling against the bed's headboard with what seemed like renewed energy, shouting at me to tell the man in the top hat sitting on the chair in the room to go away and leave him be. Usually, with patients like these in this state of stress, we just go along with their delusions to calm them down. If there are nurses watching, which I hope there are, you'll know what I mean. In this case, with him screaming in the room, I turned towards the chair and started talking to this imaginary man in a top hat, telling him he needed to go, that the visiting hours were done, and that he needed to leave right now or we'd have to call security. After this, the patient calmed down, thanked me effusively for sending the man away, and lay back down to rest. I went back to the nurse's room and back to studying the new patient. As I walked back in, my heart stopped. All I felt was panic gripping my heart. As I stood there, not knowing what to do and looking at the surveillance cameras, there was a big shadow standing right in the middle of the frame of the camera recording the end of the corridor, right in front of the bedroom I had just been in. I took one step back and leaned backward to check if I could see anything there, and there was nothing. I gave the cameras another quick glance, and the shadow was still there, standing terrifyingly still in front of this patient's bedroom door. This time, though, when I turned to look directly at the corridor again, the shadow was there. For a brief moment, everything seemed to come to a halt, and I stood there, staring at it foolishly. Then, slowly, it turned towards me, a pair of strange, dark red eyes showing. It stood like that for a bit, screeched at me, and flew into the patient's bedroom, slamming the door behind it. My auxiliary nurse jumped awake at the slam of the door and started frantically asking me what was going on. I was out of breath by now. I told her what I had just seen and what had just happened, and she couldn't believe me. I asked her to come with me to the patient's bedroom, and she agreed, starting to become curious. We walked slowly through the corridor, passing every door carefully. I was afraid that anything would come flying at us. When we got to the bedroom this thing flew into, I pushed the door without going in to check for any kind of danger and immediately felt a breath of freezing air hit me in the face. The air conditioner was on in every room and set to 23 degrees, so this was not normal. Nothing came flying at us, like I was afraid would happen, but there, right by the patient's bed, there was this shadow. I could tell it was a man, tall and strong, with a top hat over his head. I asked my auxiliary nurse if she could see him, not expecting a no. However, that's what I got. She couldn't see anything standing there, and definitely not as clearly as I could. Slowly, the shadow turned towards me again. This time, it didn't scream. This time, it slowly dissipated. Immediately I calmed down. Not only could I not see it anymore, I also couldn't feel it. This sense of calm came over me, and the patient seemed okay, so we left the room and went back to the nurse's room. My colleague went back to sleep, but I didn't rest until I checked the rest of the unit to make sure everyone was safe. Thereafter, I couldn't help but stare at the cameras every minute for the rest of the night. Eventually, our shift was over and would become the one with the most intense experience I ever had. The next day, when nighttime came and I did all my rounds, I went inside room 7 to check on the patient. When I came closer to him, I realized he had passed away. This was my first experience with the shadow man in the top hat, but it wasn't the last, and it's still ongoing. I'm the only one who can see him around the unit, which freaks everyone out. Every single time I see him, it's under the same circumstances. I walk into a patient's room, and there's his shadow at the foot of their bed. I wait for a little while until he turns to me and dissipates. 1 or 2 days later, the patient passes away. This incident is a real story, and it's something I have to live with almost every day now. I'm not sure if this thing is killing people or announcing their deaths, but if you are a nurse in a similar unit or know someone who is, please share this with them and comment on what you know about it. I need to know what this is, how to deal with it, and if anyone else has experienced the same as me, even if it's a different looking entity. I can keep you updated on here if people are engaging and want to know more. Please let me know if you want any updates, and I'll make sure to bring them. If you are experiencing something similar, please be assured that you are not alone. Maybe these thoughts will help you feel less afraid. A few years ago I worked as a custodian from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. at an elementary school. I apologize for the length, but it was indeed a lengthy school year. Due to poor management, our company had employees leaving almost monthly. By October of that school year, I was by myself in the elementary school/attached district office building from 6 p.m. until 11 p.m. The school was built in the 50s and was the area high school until the high school built a new building next to it, attached by a long hallway. This school was then one of 3 elementary schools in the city, but structurally was the worst. Leaking ceilings, poor plumbing, asbestos everywhere, the worst electrical wiring you've ever seen, etc. Thus why it was being torn down. My first night on the job in this school, once the other night custodian quit, I was cleaning the district office, and I kept getting this feeling that someone was behind me. It was only 4 p.m. and still light out, so I figured someone was lingering after the school day, but it was empty. In one particular dead-end hallway in the district office, I had the intense feeling that someone was behind me, blocking the way out of the hallway. It didn't feel malicious, more like when a friend is sneaking up behind you to jump out and scare you for laughs. I half-jokingly brought it up to the day custodian the next day when I came in, and without missing a beat she said, "Oh, that's Gordy. He was the custodian here for years but died a few years ago." It sounded like she was pulling my leg, but that feeling of being watched in the district office never left the rest of the school year. I had to make it a priority to clean the district office before it got dark because it freaked me out. I was chatting with another employee soon after that first day. He ended up quitting about a month later. Again, cruddy management. I told him I had to get to the district office before it got dark. He cut me off to say, "I refuse to clean that place. It feels like someone's standing behind you." I was shocked because I hadn't mentioned why I didn't like the district office before that, but he seemed to have the exact feeling I did. As the school was getting ready for demolition, they started early on easier things. Taking out lockers in the old locker rooms and tearing down the hallway that connected the elementary school to the high school. Once the hallway was demolished, things started picking up. At night now, in the double glass exit doors, I would see my reflection and my second reflection in the doors behind the first ones. And sometimes I'd see a third, taller shadow behind me. I quickly learned to just keep my eyes on the floor when walking through the halls at night. The school was rigged with some shitty electrical sockets/light switches. In one classroom, you'd need to flip the switch on, go clean another classroom, and come back in time for the lights to actually turn on in the first room. Because of this, many rooms had newer motion sensing lights installed when the switches went to shit. But there were many times that the motion lights would turn on behind locked doors, like in the teacher's lounge or a locked bathroom, but they'd be empty when I checked. By this time it was December, and there was no avoiding cleaning the district office after dark. While in the district office one night, the motion light in the bathroom at the end of the dead-end hallway flipped on, but I was nowhere near it. To test it out, I let it shut off and waited 10 minutes-ish while cleaning, then went to see if I could have tripped it from where I was in the hallway. I waved, danced around, and had to get closer and closer, but the light didn't switch on until I was fully in the middle of the bathroom, not even visible from where I was in the hallway. Another night I heard footsteps/shoe squeaks in the dark gym clear as day, but when I stepped inside and the motion lights turned on, there wasn't anyone there. Then the footsteps started. I would hear footsteps/keys rattling in hallways that were empty when I ran to check. Teachers would sometimes come in at night if they forgot something, but they usually made their presence known by shouting hello, waving, or turning on the classroom light. But to hear keys/footsteps in a hallway I just left that I know was empty was jarring. Even worse, I started noticing that loud activities after 9 p.m., like floor scrubbing or playing my speaker, either increased the footsteps or that feeling of being watched in the district office, but now it was all over the school and following me. One night in February, now the only elementary school employee after 6 p.m. since everyone else quit, I was cleaning bathrooms. The girls' bathroom light wouldn't turn on no matter how much I flipped the switch or left it and came back. Because I couldn't clean in pitch black, I sent a Snapchat of me flicking the switch, soft switch, didn't make a click noise, to the day custodian, proving I wasn't trying to get out of cleaning a bathroom for nothing, and to one of my old coworkers who quit, saying, "Shitty bathroom wiring won't turn on lights." I didn't get a response from the day custodian, but my old coworker sent back, "What's that noise? It sounds like a stall door is slamming." But I didn't hear any noise when I was playing with the switch. By March I hated this school. The footsteps, the feeling of being followed, the figures in the windows/doors, I hated it. At one point, I found myself Googling how to sage a place that I couldn't burn sage in. Sometimes people from around the school district would bring up spooky stuff from their experiences in the school when they'd catch me on lunch or something. A high school office worker used to work at the district office and would hear the bells jingle on the locked door as if someone opened it, or hear giggles in the district office at midnight when she was behind on work one night. The office woman for the elementary school had heard the school's old and defunct fire alarm ring one night, but just one bell, and not the newer system. But that could have easily been the school's shitty wiring. I spent my lunches with my coworker who worked in the adjacent high school. One night he said he was done at the high school, but we had to stay clocked in until 11 p.m. in case people needed in for whatever reason. I instructed him to join me at the elementary school while I finished my shift. As we were shutting off lights at the end of the night, he was shutting off the last hallway lights that were opposite from the exit. Walking through the hall, he stopped with the most confused look on his face and stepped into the bathroom, the boys' bathroom next to the girls' bathroom with the stall door noise that one night. I asked him what was up when he came out looking just as confused, and he said, "I just heard a kid's voice saying 'Where are you going?' really fast." He absolutely could have been pulling my leg, as I'd told him how I hated the school, but he and I are still close friends now, and he's still serious and adamant that that's what he heard, 3 years later. By April our company was going to shit. Our supervisor was told he was being canned, and we were given the unofficial notice that our cleaning company wasn't being rehired by the school district. I don't blame them. 2 employees in 2 schools cleaning all classrooms, bathrooms, hallways, common areas, meeting rooms, and computer labs, as well as snow removal and event staff. Things weren't looking great on the cleanliness side. I found a new job and left by mid-April. As the school was being demolished at the end of May, I truly didn't care that much. My other coworker didn't need to clean the elementary after I left, thank goodness, and I watched as they tore it down. I hated that school. Duck Gordy, duck whatever kid was following me in the hallways at night, and duck the district office workers that complained to my boss when I missed a single hole punch when vacuuming their haunted-ass office for them. I work with the elderly and spent a few years working in a specialized dementia facility. At one point, we had 2 residents, a man and a woman, who worked at a company called Air Products together for 20 plus years. However, due to the dementia, they did not remember each other. The female resident's dementia was very advanced. Physically she got around great, however, she was incapable of forming sentences together, or even words sometimes, without it coming out completely gibberish. Fast forward a few months, and the male resident passed away. I was at the back of the room while the residents were watching a movie when the female resident walked by and sat next to me, something she never did. I see her staring off into the back of the room where no one is, and I ask her what she is up to. She looks at me and clearly says, "That's the guy from Air Products." In my 2 years of knowing this resident, I have never heard more than 2 words come out of her mouth clearly, let alone a full sentence like that. I asked her where she saw him, and just like that, her words were back to being jumbled and incomprehensible. I worked for a shitty home improvement retail store when I was a teenager. I started my shift after my college classes, but it was just part-time, so usually I worked 4 to 8 p.m. Sometimes, though, hours would shift a little, and I'd have to work until close, i.e., 10 p.m. Anyway, on one of those late evenings, there was this redhead who worked the registers. Sometimes the cashiers would need to carry all the crap people changed their minds about buying and put it back on the shelves late into the night. By this point the store tended to be nearly deserted. She came to my department, which was located near the back of the store, and asked me straight up if I could escort her around the store while she finished restocking the merch. So, idiot white knight that I am, I did. I asked her why she needed me to come with her. She said this much older guy, late 40s-ish, had been following her around the store and flirting with her since she'd started her shift in the morning. That's 6 or 7 times the same guy came to hit on her in a 9 to 10 hour shift. We did have security in the building, and she did report the guy, but our 2 guards were the most useless sacks of dough ever and couldn't even find him despite the guy returning to harass her numerous times. So anyway, I follow her around while she puts her merch back, and as I'm making small talk, I can see this guy half hidden between an end cap and the lumber storage. He was older, like she'd said, but jacked to the ducking gills and taller than me by a few inches. I'm 5 feet 11 inches. We made eye contact, and he was looking at me like I was having an affair with his wife or something, trembling and crazy-eyed just like in the movies. So, yeah, this dude would have absolutely destroyed me, and the store was near closing with only a skeleton crew scattered throughout this massive store. Somehow I gathered up the courage to ask, "Can I help you, sir? We're just about closed here," in the most assertive way my 18-year-old brain could muster, which was enough for him to scurry off. The girl just kind of smiled nervously at me like, that was him, wasn't it? By the time my shift ended and I went to my car, there were only a single-digit amount of vehicles left, and all of them were parked in employee stalls save one, which was parked all the way on the other end. I couldn't see if there was anybody inside, but there shouldn't have been any customers at that point. The next day the redhead told me the guy had tried to follow her home, but she avoided him by turning into a side road at the last possible second. She quit shortly after that, couldn't blame her with the incompetent security, and I never saw either her or that dude again. I wish I could at least remember her name, but it's been a long ducking time. We lived in a small enough city that this kind of thing was fairly rare, so the person must have been from out of town. This is a series of ghost stories from my old job. I'm a teacher in Ireland, and my old school has so many ghost stories, each of them centering around a particular room. I hope you enjoy it. Most of the stories come from the caretaker Alan, as he is most often in the school late. These stories are not in any particular order and were told by him. In the past, in my old school, students used to participate in a school sleepover to raise money for homeless charities. However, one year there was an incident, and the event was never repeated again. The students who were sleeping in room 10 ran out of the room screaming during the night and had their parents collect them early. Nobody knows what happened, but after this the event was never repeated. The next story comes from an SNA, special needs assistant, called Sarah. Sarah was helping clean up the school at the end of the day. She was in room 10 sweeping up when she swears she saw the face of a nun in the reflection in the mirror. She told a few people but convinced herself it was her mind playing tricks. A few weeks later the students opened a time capsule that was buried and contained pictures of the school when it was opened. One of those pictures was the nun Sarah claimed to see, and she fainted upon seeing the picture. This story was told to me by Alan, and I asked Sarah about it, and she backed it up. The next story comes from Alan himself. Alan was in the building late at night because the burglar alarm went off. He walked around the building and noticed one of the emergency exits was open. After closing it, he went around the building to check everything was in order. As the clock struck 12, the door to the lift opened up. Alan ran from the building without resetting the alarm. There is yet another story from Alan. Room 10 was an upstairs room, and Alan was downstairs alone cleaning up. Alan heard the sound of chairs moving in room 10, as if a class had just concluded. He went upstairs to see who was there, but all the chairs in room 10 were up on the table where they are supposed to be. Eventually, management decided that the staff room should be expanded, and they did this by knocking down the wall between the staff room and room 10. Room 10 was no longer a classroom, but strange things continued to happen in the corner of the staff room that was formerly room 10. The next story is from a teacher called Kara and an SNA called Rose. Kara always came in to work very early and was usually the first person in the building. As she was walking in, she could see a light in the staff room and a figure by the printers. The printers are located where room 10 used to be. She was confused as there were no other cars but nonetheless went inside anyway. Kara got into the staff room, and the lights in the staff room were off. She didn't bother whoever was by the printer and sat down but could still hear paper rustling. Eventually the SNA Rose came in, and Kara asked her who was by the printers. Rose said there was nobody there. The next story comes from another teacher called Emma. Emma began working early one day, and just like Kara, she entered the staff room and turned the lights on. Emma saw a figure down beside the printers, room 10, doing work. Emma said hello, and that was the end of it. She turned to make a cup of tea, and when she turned around again, the figure was gone. Those are all the stories I was told. Alan told me all of them one day, and it was backed up by everybody else. I never made any observations myself, but there was one moment where I had a feeling something was wrong. There was a school musical, and I was working on it. I went for a little coffee break in the staff room around 9 p.m. The lights were off, and I put them on, but the printing area was pitch black. I stood and stared into the blackness, feeling like there was definitely something in there looking back, but nothing happened, and I went back to work. I worked at a haunted hospital. Let's start with some background. I have worked for 1.5 years at the hospital as a service assistant. I've worked DS, day shift, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., S, evening shift, 2 p.m. to 9 p.m., and NS, night shift, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. During the DS, we are around 50 to 90 in the service department. During S, there are about 15 people, of which 10 are responsible for cooking from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., and during NS, there are only 2 of us. It's no secret that you experience the most during the late evening and early morning hours, and oh my, I've seen a lot during the 1.5 years I've worked there. There are particularly 2 departments known to be haunted, Department 12 to 3 and Department 28 to 1. Both are outpatient departments, which means they are cleaned either in the evening or at night, and that's also where the most happens. Department 12 to 3 when I had just started, I had an evening shift/training shift with Morton. It was my 3rd shift, so we decided to split up. Morton took the active, 24-hour, departments, as those are the busiest, and I was assigned 3 sleeping, outpatient, departments, as well as 1 closed department, which had been shut down because many patients became drastically and quickly more seriously ill. We call it Department 12 to 3. Morton told me to remember that, no matter what. Here's a quote from him. If you hear something on 12 to 3, no you didn't. If you smell something on 12 to 3, no you didn't. If you see something on 12 to 3, no you didn't. If you hear someone, whether you know the voice or not, calling you, no you didn't, leave the department immediately, don't look back and stay calm, go in the opposite direction of the voice. Of course, this was very unsettling to hear when I had to go up to that very department alone. After cleaning half of the department, I suddenly heard a knocking sound from one of the rooms but kept working without reacting because if you hear something, no, you didn't. As I was finishing 4 rooms, I suddenly heard Morton calling me and saying he needed my help in Department 14 to 2. I remembered what he had said, stayed calm, and left the department quietly, taking the elevator down to the 2nd floor. I paged Morton, which we always used to contact each other during a shift, and asked if he had been to 12 to 3 and called me, and also asked if he needed help in 14 to 2. Morton was silent for a while and then said, if I needed help, I would have paged you. You didn't respond, right? Morton sounded really concerned, but I reassured him that I hadn't answered and had just left the department quietly, putting my cleaning card in place so everything seemed normal. Morton replied that he was glad to hear that and said we were done with 12 to 3 for the night. We'll report to DV that we missed 4 rooms. To this day, I still don't know what's up with 12 to 3. I just know I've experienced it many times since during evening and night shifts, and I will never go back there, either as staff or a patient. Department 12 to 4 on the same evening as the previous story, I had to clean in Department 12 to 4, which is the department just across from 12 to 3. This department is special. Here, the service staff must also check the surveillance footage during the afternoon and evening hours. While I was sitting and checking the surveillance, I got chills running down my spine. I jokingly filmed the screen of the surveillance system, as it's quite unnerving to sit alone in a closed department and watch the footage. To my great shock, I saw someone walking around in the waiting room on the footage. I even caught it on video, but the quality of my video was blurry in the seconds leading up to and during the moment the person was walking around. Department 28 to 1 another evening. When I was on the evening shift, I had to clean in 28 to 1, which is another department known for being extremely haunted. It's a department where, even during the day, staff feel uneasy being there. It's a locked department after 3 p.m., and unlike other outpatient departments, you need both a keycard and a code to get in. There's no medicine or anything valuable there, but it's a department that no one wants to be in. Extra security has been added because the door has often opened by itself when patients or staff have walked past, even though the door was locked. I had to go in and clean, unlocking the door with both the keycard and code. What's special about outpatient departments is that you don't turn on the lights when you clean in the evening to avoid patients thinking the department is open and wandering in. Anyway, I was in my own world cleaning when, during our evening shifts, we are allowed to listen to music through headphones, which I was doing this evening. Room 11 remains unclean. No matter how many times you enter to clean, the door always locks again. It sounds like things are being knocked over and thrown around inside. When you open the door again, paper, trash and various items are scattered throughout the room. It's just a room you don't want to be in because there's an incredibly uncomfortable feeling, and you feel like you're being watched. Additionally, you hear strange sounds throughout the department, like footsteps running down the hallway, things being thrown, knocking on doors and windows, and generally feeling watched. I can't fully explain what's going on in the department, but it's not a nice place to be, and we all agree on that. Additionally, the department has an elevator door that requires both a code and a keycard to open after 3 p.m. The service department's office is 2 floors above 28-1, so you often take the elevator down from the office and up to the office. One night when I was about to start my night shift, I went up to clock in on the schedule, then took the elevator down to the ground floor. The door normally opens outward to the main hallway, but this night, it also opened inward to 28-1, and I heard a voice saying, "Come right in." The door to the hallway wouldn't open, and I kept pressing to open it until the door to 28-1 closed and the door to the hallway opened.